Welcome to In the UMAverse. I'm today's host, Karen Krolock, she, her, one of the co-artistic directors of Monkey House and a founder of the Dictionary of Negative Space. Today we're going to be talking about tools for remembering and understanding, and we are coming to you from Malden, Massachusetts, which it's important to recognize is on the unceded territories of the Pennacook, Pawtucket, and the Massachusetts. As we get started today, I thought it would be interesting for each of our panelists to give a quick introduction of who you are and your background, as well as to give a quick description of what you see in an image from the mental mapping exhibit that we're all going to be looking at, to try and give a sense of how differently we all understand things and the differences of perception. And so I can start with that. It is an image where you're looking through layers of leafy summer leaves next to a kind of a skew image of the river where there is a purple heart kind of growing up out of the trees that becomes the hair of a feminine human form looking up at this bright burst of color that reminds me a lot of when I was little, the way that Polaroids, if you put your finger on them, would kind of have this explosion around them. And on her neck, there are either her veins, the veins of the leaves, or possibly just a mapping of future floodplains.
Hey, thank you, Karen. My name is Mavi Ruiz. I moved to Malden a couple of years ago. I'm currently working at a startup in Boston. I'm a neuroscientist by training. Yes, new resident of Malden who has her kids here and really loving the environment here. I'm originally from Peru, so it's been an interesting contrast to move over this lovely town. That image, you describe it beautifully. It was, I love the double exposure of this person with the forest on top of it. The first thing that came to my mind was the tree with the branches are kind of around the head of this person as she's looking upwards. And I couldn't avoid but thinking of dendritic trees. This is like the neurons that make our brains. They also look like trees. So having the tree superimposed to the woman's head, I was like, oh, that looks like a neuron. And it's interesting how these different levels have similar structures across.
All right. Well, thank you for passing me the ball. My name is Xavier Taylor. Really nice to be here with this panel with everyone. I love like all aspects of art. I started drawing when I was young, started getting into different comic books, things of that sort. And after college, I really started to adopt becoming what a creative director would do. So knowing how to do photography, videography, illustration, design. Maybe not being the best, but understanding if I hire someone, what they're going to be doing. So I love art. I love all aspects of art. I can talk about it all day, as you can tell. So kind of moving on, this image, I looked at it again today just to see if I got the same reaction when I first looked at it, and I did. And to me, I like to sleep on a lot of things too, like if it's a big decision about something, because like having that gut feeling to me it means something. So when I seen that image, Mavi kind of took the words out of my mouth. I thought of neurons, I thought of connections, but the double exposure reminded me of when I used to do negative films and go into the dark room. And you would get unpredictable results from things that you didn't know when you're mixing different baths and mixing different liquids to get some type of image. The spontaneity of the image is what makes me most excited, and it makes me connect images to history, if that makes sense. So I think some of the best images, they tell a story, but they also help you to connect so you can connect your story to what's being told. And so I started thinking about things in my childhood, and I was like, why does this image do that to me? So I couldn't make that connection because I need to keep studying it. But, you know, like they say, pictures tells 1,000 words, and this one, to me, told millions. And so, you know, it's kind of cool how we all get connections from it. So.
No, that's great. I'm Marissa Zampino. I work for the Mystic River Watershed Association, which is a local environmental nonprofit. And we do a lot of work here in Malden as well. I'm originally from Atlantic City, New Jersey, so moved to the area. A little bit of culture shock because it's a little bit different, but very similar. I think Northeasterners, we all have a kind of grit to us that's a little different than other parts of the country. And I also partook in Josh's project, which was really amazing and really fantastic. And I'm very honored to have been able to work with you, Josh, in that work. For me, the image, it's what everybody's been saying. I think when I first looked at it, it was just a general sense of like wonderment. Like I think we miss nowadays your eyes like blowing up when you look at something. And you can just find something new each time you're looking at that image. And feels a real, like, you're like, okay, yeah, like we do still have connections to nature and to the outdoors as I'm looking at this image. So it brought me a lot of joy in general, and still does. Every time I look at it, I'm like, oh wow, that's really beautiful.
Thank you so much, Marissa.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone, for your input. I feel better about the image. Not that I felt bad, but it feels more alive with everyone's input. My name is Joshua Sariñana, and I'm the director of mental mapping, the project that we're discussing. I'm originally from California, but I've lived in Malden for the past few years, and I direct socially engaged art projects and have participants like Marissa, who's amazing to work with. And looking forward to discussing more about the project overall. But just to give you more background on the image, it is a multi-exposure image. One of the other participants, Flor Delgadillo, and you know, you touched upon multiple facets of the image that were intended, like the dendritic branching, and it kind of overlaying with the back of her head. There's cerebellum, really. That's what I was thinking. And the river itself, which is the composite on the bottom part of the image, and you know how that relates to not only the nature in Malden, but you know, kind of like a stream of consciousness in terms of how we think about our past and our future. So I really appreciate everyone's input and giving me their insights. And we'll cut to the short video.
Mental mapping is a project I've been working on that explores how we make connections as we travel between our internal and external worlds. That is, how our mind and the environment we occupy connect. These links are and will continue to be profoundly shaped by changes in our climate, advances in technologies like artificial intelligence, and our social relationships. Using my background in neuroscience, I work to visualize the unseen networks of the brain, the emergent activity of the brain networks that build our perceptions and cognition, and how they're reflected in the physical world, as well as the virtual spaces we interact with. This project is an investigation where art meets science and technology. Through detailed interviews, I work with and interview local participants who come from diverse backgrounds with the intent of mapping their mental pathways. Participants include those that make glitch artwork, that express their artistry through performance, and other multidisciplinary modes of creation. Using artificial intelligence tools such as ChatGPT, I analyze our discussions to find relationships between their personal and collective stories, mapping how they navigate and interact with their physical surroundings, the impact of digital environments on their creative work, and how they traverse their social networks. The themes from the stories are then used to create the images for this project. Stories are translated into photographs of the participants, the natural environment, such as the Malden River and the city's trees, as well as the surrounding urban landscape. Together, these images provide a map that connects our past and the future, reflecting hidden networks that were identified in our interviews. As this project continues to develop, I look forward to the continued evolution of mental mapping, primarily through the impact of social and community engagement. The future of this project is to provide a rich sensory space to bridge our internal, physical, and virtual worlds by further blending art, science, and technology.
So one of the questions I had after seeing this, that's kind of the central organization of today's conversation, is, we've had portraits and we've had maps and we've had names for things for thousands of years in, all different types of civilizations and cultures. And as we're getting to this moment of the kind of early stages of interacting with AI, I'm curious about what people here think of how those tools are going to be used differently or better or worse because of AI, and what that integration is, particularly, Josh, given how much of the natural world you're using. It's interesting to be using images of nature and using AI to get there. How do you see those two things dovetailing?
Well, thank you for setting that up, and a great question. I come at almost everything from a neuroscientist perspective. So I've worked in networks for the past, 15 years. And so artificial intelligence, particularly the artificial neural networks that kind of empower it and train these systems, have been around for some time. And so, being at MIT, it was just always in the air, and you're always discussing it, whether directly or indirectly. So in that sense, I'm very used to just thinking about networks, whether it's these artificial ones or social networks or ecological networks or brain networks. And as it relates to the external world, I think about just how the brain, in terms of its activity, results in our emergent perception and sensation, and even connecting that to how we feel physically. And so the connection isn't direct artificial intelligence to, say, a sensory experience, but they're all networks together, and I like investigating those pathways.
Xavier, I know you've been writing a bit on AI and the arts. Do you have thoughts on how these tools, whether it's mapping, whether it's looking at portraiture, how they are going to be influenced and affected by AI, or what you would like to see us not have changed by AI?
I would say, one of my colleagues who's co-writing this book with me on AI, he's a copywriter, and he has a background where he's been in technology. He's taken things apart, putting things back together, and I like the connection between art and technology. When you think of photographs, like these images, there's so much technology that cameras use that people were so much against at the time when people were doing frescoes and painting. And so having a really good syncing, or a good marriage between technology and art, I think is important. When it relates to AI, I see, because I read a lot of things what artists are saying, and there's a negative connotation to it. There's not let's explore more, let's get to know more, but there's more of a fear, whether it's misplaced or whether it's just a sense of the unknown, like the fear of that unknown. There's not so much an adoption to it. So I like projects like this one because, it helps people open up their mind to possibilities, and helps people to understand what the benefits are versus what are all the risk and what it can do against you.
Mm-hmm. And Mavi, I know you have been working in neuroscience, and particularly looking at things that are going to be wearables on the body that people can have. And I was thinking about that in relation to these images, and the idea of kind of what we see within people because of the images, whether it's the reflections of nature or aspects of the conversations that they had with Joshua. I'm curious, as you're thinking about wearables that are working with neuroscience, how do you see the sense of them being an extension of us in our body as part of the process of thinking of what makes people want to use them or become excited about using them, and how does that help with some of the fear that Xavier was just talking about? And best of all possibilities is like a part of an extension of the human body, more becoming a physical cyborg.
Yeah. See, fascinating question. So, just to give a little bit more context, and Neurable is working on a pair of headphones that can track brainwaves, and we want to use that technology to help people focus better, get in the zone, take breaks before before they get burned out or something like that. And when we are developing this technology, a lot of people, the first thing they ask is, can it read our thoughts? And we say, like, it's not there yet at all. It's a very different thing. It's almost like tracking like rhythms of the brain. It's like tracking rhythms of breathing or rhythms of the heart. It's very different from tracking specific thoughts. If you would like to steal somebody's thoughts, a more effective way of doing it is like stealing their phones. And that's just to highlight that we are already kind of cyborgs. Like how much our memory is on our smartphones, so much of our thoughts. And just to offer like a little bit more back in time, another example, I read somebody shared that we are cyborgs just for the act of writing, that we can write things longer than we can remember, and that allows us to have more complex thoughts that we would without the ability to write. So that already kind of makes us cyborgs.
No, I mean, it's a really interesting question of, there's certainly some people within the arts world who've been asking it around technology, and when we do have parts of our memory stored in phones or on hard drives and in other places besides us. But part of what's been interesting too is some of the neuroscience research that I've been seeing that looks at how we store memories in places, and how, for myself, I know that about a decade ago, there was a large family tragedy where 3 of my family members were killed in a car crash. And there was a day, months later, where I was walking down the street and got to a brick and just began sobbing and had no idea why I was sobbing there. And my friends were very, very worried about me. And all of a sudden I realized, when people die very suddenly, you don't have time to think about all the last places you'd seen them. And my brother, who passed away, had lived in Chicago, and he had been visiting in Boston the last time that I saw him, and where I was standing was where I had hugged him goodbye last. And somehow my body knew that memory, even though my brain didn't hold on to it. And when I began looking up research about this, there's been research studies that look at addiction and ways that if you get somebody to walk in through a different way to their path to work, where they used to smoke here and have a cigarette here, that they can stop simply because the body has these memories of what it expects in those places, that you can shift for that. And I'm wondering, Marissa, as we kind of bring all of this around to the idea of your work on the Mystic River, how important big parts of our landscape and our land waters are for being able to hold that kind of both personal and community memories, and why it's important to be taking care of them and researching them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even from this conversation, thinking about how our bodies remember things, our waterways remember things. Like one of the images in Josh's video was showing floodplains, where the water never forgets where it was, the land never forgets where it was. We can change it, we can straighten out things, we can put in highways, but you're gonna see a little sprout grow up in the middle of a highway. You're gonna see flooding where people are living. And so what's really important as well in terms of connecting with nature and memories is not only honoring that past, but really getting out there and like enjoying it, which is a big part of my work, is reconnecting folks with their urban landscapes, because we do live in such an urban area, and it's hard to think that we have a great outdoors to enjoy, but we do. And I think if the COVID pandemic had showed us anything, it's that the outdoors play such an important part in mental health, in our memories, and being able to even just sit quietly by a river and reminisce and think about the history and think about other people who have maybe sat there before you. So it's all really, really important and very tangible, and just reconnecting folks maybe with the connections that we've lost with AI, with technology, and showing folks there is still value and a lot of value in these places and spaces maybe we've even bulldozed over.
Well, and even, it's interesting how citizen scientists have come up more because of what AI allows us to be able to take as a lot of data from people and be able to track different things, whether it's what's being done with some of the things on the night sky that people have been able to track, or some of the bird watching patterns that can go on where you can have people taking pictures of it, and then the programs that can gather that and trace patterns of where their habitats are and when we need to be noticing that we're losing things. I mean, it's an interesting aspect of what AI can actually allow us to compile that would be hard for any one person to do on their own, but is not taking away the individual perception of things. I also found it interesting, Josh, that within your work, you're using the AI in part of the process of being able to distill down the conversations that you have with people, not necessarily just within the editing of the images and the ability of a computer to edit things. What kinds of things did you have the conversations sift through or kind of draw attention to so that you were getting the data that you needed from it?
So all the conversations were based on things that had like network properties and how they manifest in our kind of everyday life. So it revolved around environments that we occupy, like the physical world or the urban environment that we're in. Also our social networks, which can be like, in our head when we think about how we're navigating those contexts. And then also our digital or more virtual interactions. And so the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence isn't to necessarily generate the actual art object, but rather to identify themes that were within the conversation, so where do things connect that maybe we couldn't find explicitly, and then also across the different participants. So within that are the processes of the brain that I focused on in my own research, which deal with how do we represent space in our mind, and then how do we navigate space in the most fundamental and pretty much abstract way as possible. And then how do we see our social environments, our urban environments, our natural environments, our virtual environments, in what sense do they all kind of boil back down to the way in which we represent our space and navigate through it, to find connections. And those connections have kind of withered away in terms of our use of technology, which doesn't seem like that would be the case. But when you over rely on a very particular way of interaction, then you don't have the loose type of spontaneity. You don't have spontaneity in order to make connections that you couldn't actually have thought of otherwise. So kind of going back to Xavier, your point on the photograph, as a cue to remember your own experiences. That's how I view photography a lot. And then kind of going back to like procedural-based aspects of how we learn and traverse. Like those are both memory. Like you're talking about muscle memory and in your own skating, but that is a memory of the body, of course. But it's also located in your brain. And then there's more explicit type memories, like when you're going to be cued by your environment. And sometimes you're not aware of it, but it did go through your sensory inputs, and then it did result in a full-fledged memory in and of itself. So AI is a way to connect all these different ideas that I've stated in order to find where they interact either the most, or at least in some way like we can find a more direct way of approaching it.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Marissa, since you were actually one of the interview participants, were you surprised by anything that kind of came out as a connection within the portrait, or I guess portraits? I don't know whether you think of the three images of Marissa as one or as three separate things in a triptych. But were you surprised by anything that came out in what was captured in you?
Yeah, I think the conversation I had with Josh was really interesting, and even just some of the stuff that's come out where it's like cliche, but it's like everything was connected, where I didn't think, I used to be a competitive roller skater, artistic roller skater, and I used to not think that was any way connected with what I do now, like at all. And it was really shocking and surprising to see, oh yeah, there's a lot of connections in how what I did as a younger person is reflecting back into my work now, like kind of the drive, the motivation, the lack of fear sometimes when it comes to public speaking, being out there, putting yourself out there, taking a chance, taking a risk. Like, I used to throw my body onto concrete, like, you know, and I think in some of my work as a community organizer, like, you're throwing yourself out in front of people and you're saying, hey, you know, let's talk about climate, let's talk about the environment. So it was really interesting and shocking to me to see that, oh, those things actually are really meshing together, and I'm using things and skills that I've learned in the past into something that doesn't seem and is not similar at all. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting metaphor of the way that the skating is allowing you to have that kind of boldness and fearlessness that you need for the work that you're doing. And it really struck me in the image of you that, you know, it kind of captures almost a blur of light coming in, and then you, and then a blur of light coming out. How much that's often the way that I hold on to memories of people. I don't tend to be a visual thinker. I tend to be movement driven, which is probably why I spent a lot of my life as a choreographer and dancer. And so I remember pathways of things, which I think Josh's work captures in such a really visceral way for people to look at. And I'm curious because, you know, that's something that often isn't part of our portraits. Did that shape any of either one of your images or impressions of Marissa when we were first meeting? Because I don't believe any of us knew one another before this, did we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so did that shape at all how you understand her?
Oh, I thought he was gonna go. I would say yes. The image I'm thinking of, I'm not sure if it's the same image you're thinking of, where, you know, I was thinking more of like, how was this process taken? Like, how was this long exposure used, and why was it used? And then when I learned that you were in competitive roller skating, I said, oh, okay, so to show this movement, to show like the flow of thought, to show, I think Josh said the stream of consciousness. I was starting to put things together, but just loosely, kind of vaguely. But it gave me a little bit more of a snapshot, like literally like a snapshot of like the type of person you were.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think looking at the picture already is conveying a lot of that movement, and you're wondering where it's coming from. And then we talked to you, and you explained like that you are a roller skater. Like I've never met a roller skater, but without having a clear image, like I have some images, but seeing in the picture the movement, the dynamism, and it was really what I'm really curious is something Joshua said, that you transform, Marissa, when you go from skating from shoes with wheels to shoes with no wheels. It's like a metamorphosis there, and that made me really, really curious, and it's inspiring. It's like, oh, maybe I should go and discover my own self through movement. Maybe I would untap something in myself that I'm not familiar with, that is inside.
Well, and it also kind of reminded me of the river within you, you know, and the idea that all of us are constantly shifting in a way that I think we forget about. You know, every once in a while I'll see a baby and think like, when my parents met me, that's what they meant. Yeah. That's what they named. And, you know, I have no idea what they would think of what's grown up out of that. But, you know, it's a funny thing to be able to think of how much we're changing all the time, and how a portrait is at best capturing a small window of that change, and how, you know, this allows for kind of a longer understanding of you. And there was something that I was thinking about the other day of like, which people need the kind of longest time frame to really get an understanding of them, and how does that show something different about us, and how is that similar to the river, or even as you were talking, Xavier, of like needing to see something multiple times to really feel like we've got the ability to absorb it. And just all of that kind of came to me by looking at the image of you. And, you know, it's funny because now I kind of have that almost rainbow color head and be after you in a way that is kind of a funny thing to now have imposed there, and almost Pokemon Go sort of AI way around you.
I'm curious about the whole behind the scenes, the BTS. Like, how did you guys plan this, or how did you choose? Because I'm sure there was like a smorgasbord of like images, and you distilled. Whenever you're doing something creative, you're distilling. You're trying to get to the heart of the matter. So why that image? Like, why not another image that didn't make the cut?
Yeah, so it was awesome working with you. Like, not only just in terms of our conversation, which I love so much, but to prepare for a photo shoot, I looked at Marissa's Instagram's reels, because she's puts her work out there.
Nice.
And I found them so relaxing to watch and so amazing. And as I become compulsive with certain things, including the arts, I was really focusing on the transitions that she was making, and then how she leveraged those transitions to the next point of her like overall body structure. So what I started to realize were a lot of times you were going backwards into forward motion,
Yes.
and then also so much of it was led internally to external, but your fingertips and your toes were just, the lines that you had mentioned were really prominent, and kind of like the grates and the transitions were what I was trying to go for. And I made the mistake of being like, here are all the screenshots, Marissa, of you making these transitions, which probably happened within 1/100th of a second. And I'm like, do that.
Yeah.
And then you didn't have your skates on, and I was like, to solve this problem, why don't you wear some skates? And then it was just, your whole demeanor changed. It's like, wow, I couldn't believe that I just didn't think of something so obvious. But yeah, I think the reason why I like that image so much is because it felt like you were lost in a moment, and I think it really did capture like a transitional state. And in fact, two of the images are actually the same image. It's just that your face changed so much in between that 1/60th of a second that I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting because Joshua was showing me screenshots. I didn't have my skates on. I was like, I don't know how to move like that. So it is going back to memory. It's like the moment, and even when I go out and skate, a lot of my friends my friends who skate, and then my friends who don't skate, everybody's like, you just completely change as a person. Like, completely. One of my coworkers jokes all the time. She's like, sometimes, Marissa, I don't think the videos of you are you, because I don't see you in that way, and you don't act that way or move that way when you're working at the Mystic River Watershed Association. But then when you put your skates on, it's Josh is right on it, where it is, I guess I am a completely different person, and it's kind of like a switch that's being flipped. So yeah.
In a way, I mean, it's an interesting cyborg, like you were talking about with writing, that the skates transform you into something, and I know for me, I just bought a new walker because when I have pain episodes and I'm in public places, I need to be able to get somewhere where I can get comfortable with it. And I used to have just a traditional walker, which has terrible wheels for being out on the sidewalks, and it doesn't have great brakes, and it is clearly not designed to be going off-roading and things. And now that I have one that has like tires that are like a bike tire, and it's got a really sturdy frame, I feel braver. It was amazing, the difference of just the first day of having that it went from something of feeling like, oh, I need to be able to like look at this place ahead of time and get a sense of where I can go, to like, oh no, it needs to look out for me now. And I think, there's something interesting about how those devices almost become like little parts of land that we're carrying with us, and how that kind of holds that sense of freedom that you get with a wheel, and even how a wheel, I'm sure at one point in time, was a controversial piece of technology. And I think it's funny too, thinking about how simple things like that give us such an edge of understanding ourselves and environment. And I'm kind of curious about going in the opposite way of what do we think we lose when we aren't in those places, when we aren't having those things that help to remind us of that, and why is it important to be able to document things like this, not just for right now for you, but for future people who are coming into the world or being able to see things? What's important to hold about that, or what don't we get if we stop doing that?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that Well, let me start somewhere a little bit further back, and hopefully I'll make the connection. Our brain states change when we move. So we have the EEG, the way in which our brain like coordinates itself through waves. They're related to our states. So it could be through relaxation, the stage of sleep, when we're awake, but also when we're moving, like we're walking or running. And that type of brainwave organizes the physical circuit. And it does so in ways that it can like lead to new memories making new memories, but also memories coming in as you traverse your environment. So it's super important to have pathways because it allows us to be in an entirely different state. And those pathways kind of dictate our state indirectly because they also manage the way we move. So you have things that are very fluid, like oscillations in the brain, which organizes the activity. But then you have pathways in the real environment that also organize our activity by just the sheer fact we have to move, via a sidewalk, or if people started taking a trajectory that the sidewalk didn't cover, you can often see them right in grass when people just want to cut through, similar to like that. So I don't know how much that actually gets to the point you're trying to make, but the importance of pathways are both external and internal in terms of organization.
It makes me wonder, like, as people spend more and more time in front of the computer, do they lose that? Or that is just different? It's not something is missing, it's just different. All the movement is like at the fingertips. And when people talk about like brain-computer interfaces, they even imagine one step forward where you just controlling it, you're just sitting like that and just controlling it with your mind. And in all of these conversations, not a lot is talked about how much is lost by not moving and interacting physically with a physical world. So
That's fascinating you mentioned that, because I don't know if this relates, but my mother, she, whenever she traveled, she would use an atlas.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not familiar with that. And so before the MapQuest, before the TomToms, before she had this map in her lap. Wherever she went, she was driving down the road. And I'm like, you can get to anywhere you want with that map. And I was so fascinated by like how she was able to get anywhere. She didn't have to ask directions, she just knew. And now that we rely on like the navigation, it may be hard for you just to get to the next block, just because you're thinking of all these different things. You're just relying so much on the technology, and so that's kind of like what made me think.
Bad, or does that free up space for other things?
I don't know if it's bad. I don't know how to answer that. I mean,
there has been research that came out this winter that I actually thought was really interesting, that was looking at the difference in what we retain from information when we read on a screen versus when we read in a book. And we don't retain as much information from a screen, and part of the theory is that in a book, as your eye movement is going down the page, similar to the idea of landscape, the path that's taking makes it easier to be able to remember where on a page you saw a word, where an idea was, how far into a book. But when it's all presented in one space, it's similar to the comment my husband makes all the time about living in San Francisco before we got married, where he would talk about having no seasons, and that caused him not to be able to tell years. And as soon as he moved to New England and there were seasons again, then he was able to have like, oh, that was in October of this year. And likewise, I know one of my friends has been working at Android and has been talking about the wanting to return to stylus being used with things again, because part of what they found is that when we go through the motion of choreographing letters, we retain it differently in our brain. And when we stop doing that, we don't have as much of a distinction when it's just small movements of the finger that way. And so they're going back to trying to put into educational systems places where stylists are coming in, where handwriting is coming back, because that causes a different reinforcement in the brain of the information that we're getting.
Yeah, I don't know if it's about the implementation of the technology or our intentions, or the things that develop by the very fact that the technology evolves and we use it for different things. So like earlier in the conversation, you were talking about how technology can have like a negative response from people, like generative AI, which I can totally understand. But when you look at even back to photography and its inception, people were upset, particularly painters, were upset about its just overly realistic representation of the environment, and that there was no real artistic quality or skill sets really to create something that was in nature. And you're kind of seeing it again now. You saw it again with like digital, and then now you're seeing it again with AI. So technology is always developed for us to kind of use, and like it often creates problems, and then we try to fix it again with new technologies. But I guess pointed more at the use of these technologies, in communication. We know that when we're talking through one another, say on Zoom or whatnot, the way in which our brains synchronize are not the same as when we're in person. So one way in which we empathize is through synchrony. Like they eventually match up, in part just through having conversation and through unconscious cues of our body. And that is perturbed by screens. And we know that, like what you were saying, writing is the best way of taking notes that will maintain itself in your brain and in your body. So, as much as these technologies connect, they also disconnect. They desynchronize, but they get information to another point. So there's a push and a pull. And, automating things for the sake of automating things through technology may in itself not be particularly good, but, how we deal with it, I think, is why we have these discussions.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think it's interesting. I think we kind of forget that AI and computers and digital cameras were all created by people. And so there's viewpoints in all of those things too. And there's a way to influence or continue to play with those things. I mean, even the current conversations that are going on with Apple and Android and other phone manufacturers about being able to have cameras that pick up different skin tones because of the biases that were originally in the way that cameras were made and how they were largely being able to just pick up white skin tones. And like now, particularly as we're using them for more surveillance and things, the question of why we need to be able to make better discernments of more than just white skin tones and white facial features for that is huge, because otherwise the mistaken identity in people's lives being ruined over things not being able to see that way. And so again, just even remembering like, oh, this device is this way, but we can go back and rehack that so that it's discerning what we want it to discern and understanding what we want it to discern, rather than just thinking that it's a thing that's always been there and can't be changed. It's always kind of in dialogue with us.
Yeah, and I think particularly with things like machine learning, they're observational. They're there to see the outside. They're based on behavior, so they don't get your internal state. I don't know. I think that the use of technology to understand ourselves is great for communication, but ultimately things like artificial intelligence cannot self-reflect. In fact, because they don't have the same type of physical orientation that we do, and they don't have affect, they can't feel things like we feel.
And I think just for my own work, like as a community organizer, community engagement in the environmental field, it's blowing up because everybody's realizing the way we've presented climate has been through that science and technological lens, and we're seeing that's not working. That's why we're past that 1.5 degrees Celsius mark. That's why we're still churning out fossil fuels. And so reconnecting with people and just having one-on-one conversations. And everybody always asks me, oh, what if you come up to somebody who doesn't necessarily believe in climate change? And I'm like, well, I have a one-on-one conversation, and I will genuinely say the majority of the time, if you can isolate it, you talk to that person one-on-one, you have a reflection, you hear their points, which AI is not doing, and you say, okay, I get you, this is where we're both coming from. Let's boil it down to like an extreme heat issue. It's hot in the summer, I feel hot, you feel hot. We can connect on that point together. And so that's, at the end of the day, it is still down to those personal connections with people. So.
Absolutely, and I think that makes me even more grateful for the time that we've spent today being able to sit as a group and connect on things. And I'm looking forward to being able to follow all of your work in the future. Thanks for joining us on In the UMAverse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.